The destroyer USS Titan limped through the storm waves, crashing against the hull, rain lashing the deck and wind howling like a wild beast. The crew struggled to maintain balance, their boots sliding across the wet metal as alarms screamed from every corner of the ship. Smoke curled from the engine room, choking the air and making every breath a fight. The captain gripped the railing, his knuckles, white eyes scanning the radar for any hint of safe passage. The storm was relentless, and the sea seemed determined to swallow them whole. Each attempt to restart the engines ended in sparks and a chorus of groans from the machinery. The navigation systems flickered and died, leaving the crew in darkness save for the lightning that briefly illuminated the chaos below deck. Men shouted orders to one another, trying to coordinate repairs, but fear was a silent companion, whispering doubts and despair into every heart. The officers moved swiftly, trying to assess the damage, their faces pale and their hands shaking with tension. The radar showed jagged rocks looming ahead like teeth, ready to tear the ship apart. The waves battered the hull, throwing the destroyer from side to side, threatening to capsize it. With every surge, the crew clung to rails and each other, as if their grip alone could hold the ship together. Every explosion of thunder and flash of lightning made the men flinch and pray silently for mercy. The captain barked commands, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm, but determination burned in his eyes. He would not surrender the ship to the sea without a fight. The crew worked tirelessly, following orders, repairing cables, rerouting power, and attempting to stabilize the failing engines, but every fix seemed temporary and fragile. The storm was growing stronger, the waves taller, the winds sharper, as if nature itself had turned against them. Below deck, the smoke was thicker and the heat from the engines made breathing laborious. Every man felt the weight of doom pressing down on him, the knowledge that one misstep could end everything. The destroyer lurched violently, throwing men to the floor and making the rails slippery with water and oil. The captain steadied himself and glanced at the radar one last time before a massive wave hit the ship, sending a shudder through every beam. Every eye on deck reflected the same thought: the Titan might not survive the night. As another flash of lightning revealed the jagged rocks closing in fast, and the crew realized the storm had more to throw at them than they could possibly imagine. The Navy specialists arrived on the Titan with expressions of confidence, but within hours that confidence had crumbled. The storm battered the deck, and the engines groaned as if in pain. Every system that had once worked was failing or already dead. The specialists moved quickly, assessing the wreckage, tracing cables and valves, murmuring terms that the crew could not understand, but their faces told the story of impossibility. One shook his head, another muttered, "It cannot be done," and all of them packed their tools and left, abandoning the mission entirely. The captain watched them go, a mix of fury, frustration, and despair burning in his chest. He gritted his teeth and yelled orders to the crew to keep trying to stabilize the engines, but without guidance every effort felt like grasping at shadows. The waves grew taller and the wind harsher, as if mocking their attempts to survive. The radar showed another squall forming on the horizon, a dark wall of water and sky moving relentlessly toward the Titan. Each man and woman on deck felt the icy grip of fear as they realized they were alone. The engines emitted sparks and smoke, every heartbeat of the machinery echoing the terror inside the crew. The storm pounded at the hull, every crash and roar making it impossible to hear anything but the chaos around them. The officers shouted instructions over the wind, but coordination was nearly impossible. The deck tilted violently, throwing men off balance and sending tools and equipment sliding. Dangerously close calls made the crew gasp and stumble over one another. Their eyes darted to the radar, and then to the jagged rocks looming ever closer like predators waiting to strike. The captain refused to let panic take root. He barked encouragement and tried to rally the men, telling them to focus on what could be done to keep the ship afloat. Despite his words, the reality was undeniable. The specialists had abandoned them, and without them, the Titan was fighting a losing battle. The smoke grew thicker, the engines sputtered and groaned, threatening to die completely. The storm howled louder, each wave more punishing than the last, and lightning illuminated the terror on the faces of the crew. They clung to rails and each other, holding on to life with every ounce of strength they could summon. The destroyer tilted dangerously to one side, sending a shiver through the steel, and leaving everyone wondering if the next moment would be their last. As the shadow of disaster grew closer and the night promised no mercy across the fleet, Admiral Hargrove stared at the reports on his desk, each line a testament to failure and looming disaster. The destroyer Titan was stranded, battered, and abandoned by the very specialists sent to save her. The storm continued to rage across the Atlantic, and every minute counted. He slammed his fist against the desk, frustration burning in his chest. He knew there was only one person who could possibly turn the tide, and that person was not on any current roster of active duty personnel, but in the archives of naval legend Marcus Ironhand Delaney, had retired years ago, leaving behind a career that had saved countless ships from near-certain destruction. The Admiral studied photographs of the damaged engines, the tangled circuits, and the failing navigation systems. His fingers traced the schematics, as if willing a solution into existence. He picked up the phone and called the number that had not been used in years. The silence on the other end was heavy and deliberate. The Admiral did not hesitate. He spoke with authority and urgency, outlining the situation, the imminent danger, and the lives at stake. He promised honor, rewards, and recognition, but he knew that words alone might not be enough to persuade a man who had walked away from it all. Delaney had a reputation for being stubborn, uncompromising, and obsessed with perfection, yet the Admiral pressed on each word, weighted with the gravity of the Titan teetering on the edge of disaster. The storm raged on through the night, waves crashing against the fleet base and sending tremors through the floors of every office. Delaney's voice finally broke the silence, cold and measured, questioning why he should return after all these years. The Admiral told him that the ship was sinking, metaphorically and soon literally, if nothing was done. The engineer paused, the sound of distant thunder filling the pause before he finally asked for detailed schematics and reports to see if this was a challenge worth answering. The Admiral's heart raced, knowing that the Titan's survival now rested on the decision of one man. Delaney's eyes scanned the images and read every word, his mind racing through calculations and strategies from a career spent solving the impossible. He leaned back in his chair, contemplating the risks, the storm, the crew, and the near-certain chaos that awaited him if he failed. At last he spoke the words that sent a wave of hope through the Admiral and across the fleet. I will go, but I will need every detail, and I will need to move fast. The Admiral gave the instructions and ended the call, leaving silence in the office. But across the ocean, waves battered the Titan, as if testing whether hope could really arrive before doom, and every crew member below deck, still clinging to life, had no idea that the legendary engineer was about to enter the storm and change everything. Marcus Ironhand Delaney had left the Navy years ago, walking away from missions, accolades, and the constant chaos of warships and storms. He lived quietly in a small coastal town, repairing engines and tinkering with old machines that no one else could fix. The call from Admiral Hargrove had jolted him from his solitude. At first, he hung up twice, considering ignoring it completely, but the urgency in the voice, the desperation in the words gnawed at him. Memories of ships lost and lives saved tugged at something deep inside him. He packed his weathered toolkits, manuals, and personal equipment, moving quickly as if guided by instinct alone. The sky outside his small workshop was gray, and the wind carried the smell of salt and rain. He boarded a small private plane hired for speed, knowing every moment counted. The crew of the Titan below deck had no idea who was coming or if hope would reach them before the sea claimed their ship. They fought to keep the destroyer stable, clinging to railings and machinery as waves smashed over the deck and lightning illuminated the chaos in harsh white flashes. Marcus sat in the cockpit of the plane, reviewing schematics and mental calculations, planning every step before setting foot on the ship. He checked instruments, rewrote notes, and imagined the worst-case scenarios, calculating how he could bring the engines back from complete failure. The pilot glanced at him, uncertain of why a man so calm and composed could appear so focused and tense. Marcus only muttered a few words about timing and storm vectors, then returned to his calculations. The storm that had battered the Titan followed their route, the ocean turbulent and unforgiving. The thought of descending onto a destroyer riddled with damage and failing systems made most men tremble, but Marcus relished the challenge. Anticipation and adrenaline coursing through his veins. The clouds darkened further, lightning crackling across the sky and the rain hitting the cockpit like thousands of tiny fists. He tightened his grip on the manuals, imagining the crew below holding on, praying for help, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the fire that had once made him legendary stirring in his chest. Every calculation, every strategy he had planned would be tested against nature and metal and machinery. The plane shuddered as turbulence shook it violently, and Marcus held his breath, knowing that the Titan waited for him in the storm, with waves towering over her deck and crew clinging to life, and every second that passed could bring them closer to doom. Yet he would not falter. He would go and face the impossible, and every soul aboard the destroyer was about to see a man who did not give up against any odds. Marcus Ironhand Delaney arrived aboard the Titan as the storm battered the deck, waves smashing over the rails and rain cutting across his face like knives. The wind tore at his coat and hair, while the destroyer shuddered under the relentless assault. Every officer and crew member on deck stared at the man who had just stepped onto the slippery metal with awe and disbelief. No one spoke, but the tension in the air was thick with anticipation and fear. Marcus did not hesitate. He descended into the Engine room moving with calm precision, his eyes scanning every cable, valve and circuit as if he could see the failure before it happened. The crew watched silently as he murmured calculations and commands under his breath, words that no one else could comprehend. Sparks flew from exposed wires and steam hissed from ruptured pipes, yet Marcus barely flinched, a faint smile crossing his face because he could see the path to saving the ship. The engines groaned and shuddered under the storm outside, but Marcus remained steady, tracing connections, rerouting circuits, and noting every weak point. Every crew member felt a mixture of awe and anxiety as they followed his movements, wondering if one wrong step would end everything. The captain approached cautiously, trying to gauge if the man could really do what no specialist had managed. The engineer barely glanced at him, instead focusing on the humming, smoking, and sputtering systems that threatened to drag them to the bottom of the ocean. Marcus tapped into his memory, recalling similar failures from decades past, his hands moving with almost supernatural speed and precision, directing crew members to adjust valves, reroute power, and brace against the rolling ship. The storm outside roared louder, and the deck tilted violently with each towering wave. Crew members clinging desperately to anything solid while Marcus worked undeterred below deck. He ordered a temporary shutdown of certain circuits, rerouted cooling systems, and improvised fixes that defied everything the manuals had ever taught. The crew whispered among themselves, realizing that this man was performing miracles under impossible conditions. Even the officers who had doubted his arrival could not help but watch in stunned silence as the destroyer slowly began to respond. The engines coughed and sparked, and then hummed faintly, signaling a fragile pulse of life. The storm showed no mercy. The waves continued to assault the Titan, but below deck Marcus moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced the impossible many times before and knew that with skill, determination, and courage no ship was ever truly lost. Every eye followed his movements, but no one knew if the Titan would survive the night or if the next moment would bring disaster even closer than it had ever been before. Marcus Ironhand Delaney moved among the crew with calm authority, giving precise instructions that cut through the chaos. The men and women of the Titan followed him with a mixture of awe and fear. Each order was deliberate, each movement calculated, as he guided them through repairs and improvised fixes that no one else would dare attempt. Sparks flew from frayed wires, steam hissed from broken pipes, and the engines groaned under the weight of neglect and storm pressure. Yet slowly the ship began to respond to Marcus' touch. The crew rerouted circuits, replaced valves, and stabilized cooling systems, following his directions to the letter. Even those who had lost hope found renewed strength in his presence. They moved with efficiency that bordered on instinct. Marcus paused, frequently assessing progress, murmuring adjustments and calculations that seemed almost impossible to keep pace with the storm outside. Continued its relentless assault, waves crashing over the deck, lightning illuminating the terrified yet determined faces of the crew. The destroyer lurched violently, each roll threatening to throw men and equipment to the deck, but Marcus remained unfazed, focused entirely on the task of bringing life back to the engines. He climbed into the engine room, pausing to check connections, recalibrate systems, and instruct crew members on how to handle the delicate mechanisms. The radar flickered alive, signaling the first signs of partial recovery, and a faint murmur of hope passed through the crew. Their exhaustion was evident, their hands raw, their muscles aching, but they pressed on under Marcus' guidance. Every second counted, and every mistake could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The engines began to hum faintly, and the ship rocked steadily in the waves. Marcus instructed the crew to adjust throttles, reroute power, and monitor every gauge with meticulous care. The captain watched in disbelief as the destroyer slowly responded to life signals pulsing through her systems. Storm showed no mercy, but the crew had begun to believe they could hold on. Marcus paused, briefly wiping sweat and rain from his brow, eyes scanning every system and every man for signs of weakness or failure. His voice cut through the noise, steady and commanding, telling the crew that the worst was not yet over, but if they followed him they could survive. The waves continued to batter the Titan, and the lightning split the sky, yet below deck determination and skill began to fight back against despair, and every heart on board understood that one man had become the difference between death and survival, and that the night ahead would test them all even further. A sudden alarm blared through the Titan, signaling disaster in the engine room. Sparks erupted from the cooling systems, sending smoke curling into the air and heat burning through the metal. The crew panicked, gripping rails and each other as the ship lurched violently under the storm. Marcus Ironhand Delaney dove into the chaos, moving with speed and precision that no one else could match. His hands flew across valves, wires, and circuits, redirecting power and stabilizing failing systems. The smoke stung eyes and the heat seared skin, but Marcus ignored every sensation, focusing entirely on saving the destroyer. Every crew member followed his instructions, desperately working to hold the engines together despite exhaustion, fear, and injuries. They moved as one unit, guided by the calm authority of a man who had faced impossible odds before. Sparks flew higher, steam hissed louder, and the engines groaned, threatening to die completely. The storm outside battered the hull, waves smashing over the deck, while lightning flashed, illuminating terrified faces. The ship tilted violently, sending men sprawling across wet metal, while Marcus continued to work undeterred, pausing only briefly to assess each failure. He directed repairs with a knowledge that seemed almost preternatural. The crew marveled at his skill, wondering how one man could control chaos and destruction all at once. Hours passed like minutes, the Titan creaking and shuddering under the assault of nature and failing machinery. The fire flared up again, threatening to consume crucial components, but Marcus leapt forward, pulling wires, redirecting circuits, and stabilizing pressure valves before disaster could strike. His every movement was deliberate, every command exacting and necessary. Sparks singed uniforms, steam scalded arms, and sweat mixed with rain on every face, yet the crew refused to stop. Each second brought them closer to survival, yet also closer to collapse. The storm outside continued to rage, waves towering higher, lightning striking closer as if testing the ship and its crew. Marcus moved among them like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of survival. His eyes never left the engine's hands, never hesitated, and his mind calculated every possibility at once. The Titan groaned under the strain, her systems flickering like a dying heartbeat, but slowly responding to the genius guiding them. The crew began to feel hope returning with each hum of the engines, yet even as relief started to grow, the ship shuddered violently, hinting that the night was not yet over, and that the storm had more to throw at them before dawn could arrive, leaving everyone holding their breath for what would come next. The first hints of dawn painted the sky in pale streaks as the Titan rocked gently in the storm remnants. The engines hummed steadily under Marcus Ironhand Delaney's watchful eye, and the crew moved with a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. Every system had been tested, repaired, or improvised to keep the ship afloat, and for the first time the crew allowed themselves to believe they might survive. The deck was slick with rain and salt water, the smell of smoke and burnt wiring lingering in the air as men and women checked gauges and reinforced valves. Marcus moved among them, supervising every action, ensuring that no weak point was left unattended. The captain stood beside him, watching in awe and relief, never taking his eyes off the engineer who had defied every expectation and brought the destroyer back from the brink of disaster. Every adjustment Marcus instructed was executed with precision and care, yet he knew the night was not over, and one mistake could undo everything. The radar showed calmer waters ahead, but the Titan was still vulnerable, the storm clouds lingering and the waves still high enough to threaten the hull. Each member of the crew felt the tension slowly easing, yet Marcus remained vigilant, instructing men to monitor every gauge, every circuit, and every valve as if anticipating the next hidden danger. He walked the decks, checking every system, climbing into the engine room to inspect wiring and valves personally, offering guidance and corrections. The storm had begun to recede, but the sea still tossed the ship violently, reminding everyone that survival had not yet been fully earned. The crew whispered among themselves about the miracle of Marcus's skills and the determination that had kept them alive through the night. Every flash of lightning or crash of a wave still made them flinch, but they clung to hope now as strongly as they had clung to rails and machinery hours earlier. Marcus paused briefly, studying the engines, the radar, and the crew, a faint smile on his face signaling that the Titan was stable but not yet safe. His voice cut through the wind, giving final adjustments, instructions on navigation and system checks. The captain nodded, understanding that the journey to safety was still perilous but achievable with the engineer's guidance. Every eye on the deck followed Marcus as he moved methodically, ensuring the destroyer could reach calmer waters. The storm had tested them all and nearly claimed the ship, but under his command they had survived the worst. The horizon promised safety, yet danger still lingered in every wave and gust of wind, and every heartbeat of the crew held the tension of knowing that one false move could undo the fragile victory they had earned, and the next moments would prove if the Titan could truly make it home. The Titan creaked and groaned as it limped through the calmer waters, the storm finally easing but leaving the ship battered and exhausted. Marcus Ironhand Delaney supervised every movement, ensuring that the engines held steady and that no system faltered as the destroyer made its cautious approach toward the naval base. The crew moved with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Having survived the night of chaos and near disaster, their muscles ached, their hands were raw from gripping rails and tools, but determination and gratitude kept them going. The captain walked alongside Marcus, asking questions, checking gauges, and consulting on adjustments, but Marcus only nodded occasionally, his mind scanning every circuit and engine component like a predator searching for hidden danger. The radar blinked, showing the faint lights of the naval base in the distance, and for the first time in hours the crew allowed themselves a fragile hope, cheering quietly, only to pause and return to focus, remembering how Easily disaster could return. The engines purred steadily under Marcus' careful guidance, and the ship rocked gently in the diminished waves, but each man and woman on deck knew that the Titan was still vulnerable to failure, and that every decision mattered. The crew whispered about the miraculous work of the legendary engineer, how he had brought them from the brink of death, how his calculations and experience had kept them alive. Marcus moved among them calmly, inspecting every detail, ensuring that the victory was not premature. Every adjustment to throttle circuits and cooling systems was executed with precision, as if orchestrating a delicate symphony of survival. The captain could not hide his awe or gratitude, realizing that without Marcus the ship would have been lost. The horizon slowly brightened, revealing the naval base closer than they dared hope, but danger remained in the form of hidden hazards in the water and the fragile state of the Titan. The crew worked tirelessly, following Marcus' commands, each action deliberate and careful. Each member understood that one wrong move could undo everything and send them back into disaster. Marcus paused to check gauges one last time, his eyes sweeping the deck, the engines, and the radar, assessing every risk. The crew looked at him silently, waiting for guidance, their exhaustion balanced with trust. The first hints of cheers rose as they neared the base, but Marcus held up a hand signaling caution, reminding them that until the ship was safely docked, no one could celebrate. The Titan had survived the storm thanks to one man, and yet the tension lingered, each heartbeat echoing the fragility of their survival. Every second was a test of patience, skill, and nerve as the destroyer slowly made its final approach to safety, and every soul aboard knew that the legend of Marcus Ironhand Delaney would be remembered long after the storm had passed. The Titan limped into the naval base, receiving the first cautious cheers from crews lining the harbor, waves lapping against the hull, as if testing whether the ship had truly survived. The engines purred steadily. Marcus Ironhand Delaney supervised the final adjustments, ensuring that every system held before giving the signal to dock. The crew worked together, guided by his commands, securing lines, checking machinery, and bracing for the final movements of the battered destroyer. The captain stood at the bridge, watching every motion, aware that the ship had survived against impossible odds thanks to one man below deck. The crew exchanged tired smiles and quiet laughter, their exhaustion tempered by relief and awe. The smoke and steam had cleared, the damage was visible, but the ship floated intact. The Titan had survived the storm that had seemed certain to destroy her. Marcus moved among them, inspecting connections, checking valves and circuits, ensuring that no loose end threatened their safety. He nodded once satisfied, and then slowly made his way to the gangway. The crew formed a line to salute the man who had returned them from the brink of disaster. Men and women, who had gripped rails and tools in fear and desperation, now stood with heads high, eyes shining with gratitude. The Admiral personally approached, awarding Marcus for heroism, ingenuity, and skill, yet the engineer accepted nothing more than a quiet nod, acknowledging the work done and the lives saved. The media and onlookers recorded the moment, but Marcus paid them no attention, walking steadily through the crowd, leaving whispers and astonished glances in his wake. The captain followed briefly, offering thanks and praise, but Marcus only smiled faintly and disappeared toward the shadows of the base, where no one could follow, quietly, as if he had never been there at all. The crew gathered on the deck, staring after him, understanding that the legend they had witnessed was real, that one man had turned the tide of disaster, and that the story of the Titan would be told for decades to come. Every officer and sailor knew that survival was never guaranteed, that storms and mechanical failures would always test them, but they also knew that courage, skill, and determination could overcome the impossible. The Admiral later recounted the events of the night, praising Marcus Ironhand Delaney as a living legend whose name would echo in naval history. The Titan had survived the storm, the engineer's genius had prevailed, and the crew had returned safely, but every soul aboard remembered the fear, the chaos, the near defeat, and the quiet man who had faced it all and left before they could properly thank him. The destroyer rested at the pier, the storm passed, and the crew looked to the horizon, understanding that some legends appear only when needed and vanish just as quietly, leaving only stories of courage, skill, and survival.